there's much to talk about, but before I'd like to delve into various parts of the book, I would like to ask you about writing per se. 30 years ago, you've written or you published your first book, Always Playing, and now 3 decades later, your memoirs. How's the writing process for you? Is it pleasurable, and did it differ to the last book?
Well, the last book, I just said things into a dictaphone, and then my manager kind of wrote it down and put it into his order, and even thought of titles for the chapters, and whereas this one, it was completely my own work. I did have help from my publishing friends which order the chapters should go in, because I wrote a lot of chapters, but I wasn't quite sure what for the reader would make the best sense to be able to read from the beginning to the end slowly or fast or whatever. But I really enjoyed writing it. It was a kind of cathartic experience to look back in time, because I'm not the type of person who, and not many people are the type of people who look at the past all the time. I'm always looking at the present and the future, similar to most other people, I think. But every now and then it's a good idea just to look back, put 2 and 2 together, see why the fuck shit happened and how lucky things were in one point, things like that.
Do you keep diary? Or do you have
No, I don't. And in a way, I wish I had. But in the morning, I'll get up and practice the violin. So I've kind of got a musical chronological diary in my head. And then by the evening, I want to stop thinking about myself, because, the work with music is very kind of self-critical, and you're thinking about how to make things work. And by the end of the evening, I wanted to be reading somebody else's stuff. I prefer to read a novel or something which takes me into another world.
Mm.
So diaries is great. I think diaries, I love reading other people's diaries, because it's interesting to see how their mind works and how they react to various events in the day or the week.
So when did you start working on it, and what was is there a typical writing day for you? Has there been?
Well, there was a bit, because it was very difficult to find such a typical day before the pandemic started, but then there was a lot of time, no concerts and sitting at home. And so I'd evolved something where I'd maybe write for an hour in the morning, after I'd done some violin diddly-dee stuff. And then I'd go for a long walk or a run in the afternoon, then late afternoon do some more writing, then have some dinner, do a bit more writing. So it kind of 3 times in the day. Sometimes it would only be 2, but at least every day I was putting the pen to the paper, which then gave me time to, if I'd written a complete load of shit, then I was able to just scrap it, in retrospect. So I had too much material, but then every now and then I'd do a kind of cleaning up process, I don't know, every 10 days or so, and just get rid of the stuff which didn't make sense.
But you have written a quite extensive book. It's 550 pages or something. I don't know by heart, but you had a lot of things to say. One can say.
Yeah, and I've been told it's even worse in German, because it's apparently about 100 pages longer than the fucking English version.
Oh, really? I've read the German version, so.
I think maybe I did it in about 450 fucking pages in the English version. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But so it was a bit more, because you've got longer words and stuff,
But it's very interesting, and maybe we can start when you talk about your education. What really struck me that even as a kid, from reading it, it seems that you had not only like a bullshit detector, a very, very strong bullshit detector, but also a very strong resilience or very thick skin from the beginning. It always seemed that you always had this, fuck you, I know where I want to go attitude. Is that true, or did you have to develop that thick skin?
Well, I think it suddenly happened when I was about 13. You know, that then I was transferred to a very, very tough teacher. And I think in that school, a very tough violin teacher. And I was the only one who fought back. And I thought, well, fuck this. You know, if I get chucked out of this school, I'll be really happy, because I actually didn't really want to be in that place. So if I was like kind of chucked out, I really wouldn't have minded. But then I just thought, I'll fight back. Then she really liked me. And then she was really helpful to me, and she kind of liked my music. And so then it kind of was a very early message, well, I can be myself. And even if I go into the studio of the professor with mud falling off my clothes because I've been playing football and I haven't bothered to change, that she would still listen to my violin playing. So like it gave me a good value as to music being more important than how you look. And like that being myself wasn't so bad than trying to be something else.
Mm-hmm. And that fearlessness also was really augmented by when you knew how good you are, right? For example, when you knew that you were such a great musician.
Not really, because I don't think of myself as a big musician. I think sometimes I'm able to tap into the energy of people around me, or the positive energy which is happening from the soil and from the cosmos, or, you know, I don't know where it comes from, but as a kind of positive energy. And so when you're actually playing good music and communicating well, it's not as if you're making the music. And so I'm not going to say I'm very good, but somehow you become a vehicle for this amazing energy of music and positivity, or maybe not only positivity, different aspects of energy. You know, I prefer to concentrate on the positive aspects of energy, because there's obviously positive and negative, but like I think it takes both types of energy to make a proper picture. But tapping into that, I never think I'm very good. Every fucking morning I'm waking up and thinking what I can do better. And the only time I'm really good is when I'm playing to an audience and it's concert time and I've done my very best work and I cannot do more. You know, if I know that I've not left a stone unturned and I'm doing my very best, even if my best is not perfect, it's the best I can do. And so then there's no fear involved in it, or no doubt. It's just music can take over.
So you'd say that coming back to that fearlessness that really arose when you were in that school where you really didn't care if you'd be thrown out or not. That was
exactly. I think there was a lot of talented students in there. You know, it was like talented students from all over the world. So it wasn't as if it was like easy just to be maybe the best in that school. But what I found is I could do as good as anybody else with like 25% of the work, which maybe wasn't a brilliant discovery, because it meant that maybe I didn't work as hard as I could have done. But like it gave me a certain confidence to know that other people would be having to work 4 hours and I could do it in 1 hour. You know, that was just a bit of luck, really.
A very important person in your biography was obviously Stéphane Grappelli. And I found it very remarkable how you described it, that was he important for you not ever to become, not ever to get into danger of being a music snob, because you were pals so early on with such a great musician who was such a universal thinking musician? Was he?
I think definitely it was a big help, you know, in having some rational approach to music and not thinking that one type of music is better than another, or one type of person is better than another. Yehudi Menuhin school actually helped me with that, because like in those days, in the 60s, it was not kind of so normal for so many different races and religions to be in one place in an enclosed space. Like, so having that was fantastic. Stéphane Grappelli showed me the moment of now and how valuable that is for making music or even in life itself. And that Stéphane was such an amazing artist, and he enjoyed every second of his music making. He had a smile on his face. He was hanging out with other people from the audience and, you know, always receptive, not like the classical ones or the rock ones who sometimes didn't want to say hello to the audience or anything. In jazz, it was more like people were hanging out together, the audience, the musicians. And so it was a much more healthy kind of community around the jazz that he was playing.
There's also a remarkable scene where you describe how Grappelli said something like, discussing music, he said, "This is good pour les touristes," for the tourists.
Yeah.
Which, as I understood it, it means that you shouldn't be like exclusive. The classical music should also be available to other people, or jazz music.
Well, it kind of meant that, but he also did look down on the cheapest forms of what he thought were the cheapest forms of music. But what I saw is that he knew what worked and he knew what people liked, and he wasn't feeling above giving them what they wanted, you know, people in the audience. So, you know, da 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 da, you know, he'd play that, even though it wasn't the biggest challenge for him as a jazz musician, but he'd love playing the melody and he'd bring something of himself into that melody, even if he didn't think it was the biggest challenge.
And Yehudi Menuhin, who you just mentioned, thinking about your relationship to him, what would you say, what's the most important thing that you've learned from him?
I would say the openness of having a good attitude towards other people around. He was maybe much more pacifist than I am. I'm a little bit more combative. If someone challenges me, I'll answer back and try and win it. You know, Menuhin wasn't interested in winning anything, you know. He was kind of above all of that, like spiritually. And his openness to different forms of music in a time when most classical musicians would never listen to jazz or be seen doing it. I mean, he was a pretty bad jazz player, but the fact is that he was so open to playing it, and he recognized what a great master Stéphane Grappelli was, for instance. And at the same time as playing with him, he brought Stéphane into how many households? Because Stéphane was like forgotten. He was a forgotten man. Django Reinhardt had died, and Stéphane was playing in Sacha Distel's club for, I think, something like $100 a week. So he was really stable in his situation, but kind of forgotten, a genius, forgotten, playing in this little club of a TV star. Yeah, and so Yehudi helped Stéphane to be recognized at the level that he should have been recognized, as well as appreciating his music. So, you know, Yehudi was very open like that.
All the more surprising was then the scene you described where you played a concert and not clashed with Menuhin, but where he wanted you to play like him, and you just said you can't play like him, otherwise, I mean, you probably something along the lines saying, I don't want to play it in that way, either you play it because you're Yehudi Menuhin or I played my way, which was very interesting.
Well, that was it. You know, he can play like the best Menuhin ever in the world, And I could only ever be, even if I wanted to, I could only be the second, third, fourth best Menuhin, you know, whereas I'd learned by that point to relate directly to Beethoven. You know, like, look at the score of the music. What did Beethoven write? Maybe what do I understand that he wanted? And it couldn't be because somebody else said, I see it like that. It had to be from Beethoven himself to me to then communicate to the people around me, including the audience, you know, like getting into the vibe and the idiom of the music itself, as opposed to someone else's opinion. And so, like with Yehudi, I had a relationship with him which maybe went through 4 stages. You know, there was like the first stage where I met him as a 7-year-old kid, and like he was this charismatic, godlike figure. Then there was the second stage where he saw me starting to develop my own personality and a certain amount of irreverence to the things around me, and he fully supported that against the professors at the school who thought I should maybe be a bit more subservient. Then there was a third stage where I went and found my own way by living in New York and then coming back to Europe, and I had my own way of interpreting things, and that was where we kind of went different directions. And then there was the fourth and final stage was this kind of reconciliation where I'd go around to his house and we'd talk about Bach and you know, music in general.
Talking about having your own interpretations or your own feelings toward, like, say, Beethoven, you describe in the book that there is freedom even in music that's written down. I can only paraphrase it because I've written the German translation, but you say something along the lines, a dead composer can control if your day has been sunny or rainy, or if you're in a good mood or in a bad mood, and thus the interpretation is up to you, in a sense.
It's a certain amount like that, you know, and there's all of these improvisational qualities even in written down music. You know, what does loud mean? You know, if the guy put forte in there, how loud, how quiet, which speed? You know, nobody knows which actual tempo, how many beats per minute Beethoven conducted his concerto that I play quite a lot. You know, how many beats per minute? It's a matter of opinion. It's a matter of feeling. The tone color that one produces, you know, that's another area of freedom. Do I play with vibrato? Do I play with straight, with no vibrato? Do I play with these notes a little bit higher intonation or a little bit lower? You know, if it's sad music, maybe you want to make the intonation a bit lower so that people feel a bit more depressed when they're hearing it. If it's happy music, do you want to play the pitch a little bit higher so that you can lift people? You know, these are all matters of opinion and matters of very often just the moment. It's a matter of the moment. What is the feeling like? How are the audience? You know, are they kind of coughing a bit? In which case you need to do something slightly shocking so that they have to listen to you to, you know, or if they're coughing a bit, play super quiet so nobody can hear you unless they're quiet. You know, there's various things you can do which are according to the moment as opposed to out of a book.
But why do you think, how should I put it, why do you think that in parts of the classical world there's such a fetish for staticness, where things like that don't exist, like the moment, or where everything has to be written down and people frown if there is something that goes a little bit off what's written down?
Well, you know, even within what's written down, they have such a narrow view of it quite a lot because people are over-taught. You know, it's too much teaching, too much like, you know, a boxer. Like, I don't know if you watch boxing, but, you know, maybe Anthony Joshua is a little bit too taught and he's too much into the right mental attitude and doing the right training. And then there's somebody like Usyk, who's a lot smaller but he's got a fucking brain and he'll react to the moment. Or Tyson Fury, who's the biggest lump of fucking lard or butter that you've seen in a fucking boxing ring, but he's the best boxer out of them all, isn't it? You know, and like it just depends where your mentality is. But someone who's overtaught, you know, they can look like a fantastic physical specimen, but there's one or two other fighters who can use their instinct and they can run rings about that motherfucker. And like it's with the music, same thing. You know, it's like if you're taught too much and things become automatic, or you think you know exactly what you're doing, we never know exactly what we're doing because we don't know what's going to come at us. Is the orchestra going to be, you know, it only takes 10 people with flu to make the orchestra very unresponsive, and that you have to do a bit extra to get something back out of them. You know, there's the acoustic of the hall. You can't read how to react to the acoustic in the hall from a book. You know, it's like these things have to be assimilated very quickly and naturally, and then you've got a chance to make some communication through music, not by doing what your professor told you to do 20 years ago, or by playing the same performance 20 years later of the same concerto. Like, we find out new things all the time. You know, I've found out new things about driving in Poland, you know, because you've got so many shocking drivers here that you've just got to be super aware, you know. So I would never have thought like that in England, although I've been to France and they've got horrible drivers there too.
Yeah. Excuse me. Another very important person in your career, if we talk about boxing, then he'd be probably your trainer, was John Stanley, your manager, who boxed against EMI and who was able to give them the right mindset about what you will be able, what you would be able to do and what you later accomplished. How important was he in fulfilling your vision?
Well, I think maybe John Stanley was more like a Muay Thai artist or MMA. You know, he got the fucking record company on the floor and was just whacking them, man. You know, it was killer. And like, he was phenomenal. And he looked like Gandalf from, you know, from whatever that film is, you know, which is called
The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, he looked like Gandalf from that, you know. And he didn't have a Rolls Royce, but he'd rent a Rolls Royce so he could drive to the record company and be seen getting out of the Rolls Royce, because like record company, it's all about mercenary values and fucking making money and shit. And so they'd respect him because he obviously had a lot of money because he was getting out of a Rolls Royce. So he knew exactly psychologically how to deal with them on their own level. And he knew how to make a vision which was worth working for, which is basically meaning record sales. And like, he really supported me in a big way, because he went into that record company and he said, look, do you want to have the second Yehudi Menuhin or the second Nathan Milstein, or, you know, one of these great classical violinists? Or do you want to have the first Nigel Kennedy, in which case you have a chance not just of selling 8,000 records, you could sell a lot more than that, you know? And he was saying, you know, you could sell a few 100,000. And like, we never knew that it could go as well as it did, but like, he had much bigger vision than anybody else that I was working with. And I would say a bigger vision than anyone I've worked with since. You know, there's one other manager that I had who was really great, a guy called Jazz Summers. And he also, but he was prone to fits of physical violence. And so, you know, if a record company didn't do what they're meant to do, he'd go in and tip their desks over or fucking hit somebody, you know? And so then they were frightened of him, and like, they'd do what he wanted because they didn't want to have another scene, you know? But like, but he also kind of, he said, look, you know, I've never really done horrible damage to anybody in a record company, although, I did lock one of them in a cupboard when he was racist against my wife. It's like, so he was cool, man. But he also came up, we said something very beautiful one time. And he said, well, I don't mind if if an artist of mine and we make a record and it only sells 5 copies, that is good enough. That music has reached 5 more people than if we did nothing. So he had a very good attitude in many ways. But John Stanley was a kind of strategist. He knew strategy, and he just went into EMI and took it over and stayed in there. They even had to give him an office in there.
So he was a master of warfare in some sense, in some strategic sense.
Yeah, beat them from within. He was the Trojan horse,
It's fantastic.
And he was a manager, and he's still alive. I'm not saying was, but he doesn't do much anymore because he's a bit older, and he's achieved pretty much everything that anyone would like to achieve in that area of life. And he's also a very good artist. He's he does beautiful sketches and line drawings of charcoal and stuff. So he's got that aspect to him. He's good at writing. So I like him, but in a way now, I apply what I've learned from him into kind of, it seems like most of the managers I've had, or if I don't have a manager, I just have to use the knowledge that I've learned from him to either try and help the manager I've got know what the fuck they're doing, or do it myself, because he was just so many levels above anyone else I've met who was working in that type of job.
I mean, obviously history has proven that both of you were right. With Vivaldi's Four Seasons, with your rendition, you have recorded and released one of the most successful classical albums of all time. Now, when you think back on that and on your career, and we're just talking about the classical field now, because obviously it's much broader. Besides from your own body of work, what would you say was your biggest accomplishment in that time for the classical world? Was it to encourage artists that weren't really the norm or copies to come forward and do the thing? Or was it also to open up the whole thing to an audience who maybe wouldn't be interested in that whole very stiff, rigid genre of music?
I think that is my best achievement, is that friends of mine who would never have listened to classical music, although they did sometimes because I would say a friend, and they'd say, Nigel, that was so clever. And when they were saying that's clever, I knew they hated it, but they were just trying to be nice to me, right? And so to make it possible for some people to come in to a classical concert hall or buy that album of the Four Seasons and they actually enjoyed it without feeling the pressure. Because, classical music has got a big mystique about it. And there's all of this knowledge that normal people think that other people have, which in fact they don't have at all. No one knows more about any other bit of music than anybody else. The only things we know is, do we like it or do we not like it? Those are the only two important factors about a bit of music. Does it turn me on? Does it turn me off? There's two possibilities there, and that's all there is. And it doesn't matter if you've got a brain which makes you look like a fucking egghead, or if you've got a fucking walnut brain, and I've got friends, luckily, who come from all of those different sizes of head. And but it's either do we like it or do we not? Someone with an egghead might think of many arguments why that music is either shit or good. But no, it's just one or the other. And that people that I knew could actually come into the concert hall and not feel uncomfortable, and that they found some form of music, which then they went off and bought more types of that music, more different examples of that type of music. And that was maybe my best achievement, I think, outside of my actual work and whether I think I did good music or not.
Do you think that also the same applies to jazz? Because a lot of my friends who are not musicians have a bit too much respect for jazz sometimes, that they say, oh, well, I don't understand it. Should I really go to that concert? Do you think that that snobbery also extends to the jazz world sometimes?
I think it does now, because like the jazz world has become a bit like the classical world. You know, everybody goes to a college and musicians pride themselves on how complicated they can make something, as opposed to, you know, how beautiful or how dynamic on an emotional level, or, you know, there's lots of very valuable aspects of music, but to make it complicated is not one of those big values. And like, I think maybe in the jazz fraternity, some of, not the greatest ones, you know, but people on a very, very good level are too proud of how complicated they can be. And you never go to a party and want to get stuck in a corner with the most intellectual member of the fucking fraternity in the party. That's the last thing you want. And sometimes with jazz, you're feeling like, fuck, these guys are trying to be clever for me. I don't want to go out and hear some fucking clever bastard, you know? And like, so jazz is now turned into a classical music, I think, you know? Apart from, you know, the true greats that we can hear, you know, someone like Esbjørn Svensson, what he was doing was just another level. And like, there's many people like that, you know, but they get buried underneath these pseudo intellects, like who, you know, you can hear a song by Cole Porter and it's got 12 chord changes where there was originally 2, and you can hardly fucking recognize the song. And lyrics, did the song ever have lyrics? Not if there's harmonies like that underneath it, you know. So like, you know, they're missing the point. It's arrogant to say it, but for me, what I like to listen to is to hear the song, to be able to recognize the song. Not that it's got to be lowbrow or dumbed down, but like, that there's this beauty of the song still survives the changes which can be made to it. You know, so someone like Wayne Shorter playing Body and Soul, you know, compared with Coleman Hawkins playing it, which was the most famous version maybe. Wayne Shorter puts different fucking chord changes underneath, but like it's still got the inherent beauty of that song, right? And then that's an amazing revelation. You know, you can hear something different, but you can still hear the identity of the song. Then you have a barometer from which to compare. Where has he taken it? You know, if you move the whole song, then you don't know where the artist has taken it. So I'd say, yeah, jazz has become a bit wound up in itself. And they've taken the worst examples, you know, like classical musicians, they take, well, the best examples and taking the worst example from that example, you know. So like people, a classical composer who writes a symphony and no one understands it. And then they say, oh, well, it's because I'm like Beethoven, you know. And then like, you know, like some jazz musician going pip squeak boom bam boom, and like they're saying, oh well, no one understands it because I'm like Ornette Coleman. No, it's not quite true, really. You know, that's convenient thinking, man.
Speaking of Beethoven, in your book you've also included dialogues with a bunch of people no longer with us, including your grandfather, Jimi Hendrix, and Beethoven. Yeah. Can you talk a bit about the idea to include a dialogue with Ludwig van?
Well, you know, I love him because he's like, he was the first rebel in music, wasn't it, really? I mean, Mozart turned a bit rebellious at the end, but Beethoven was a rebel pretty much from the beginning, after the first 10 years of his career anyway. And like, he changed things in every way. And there's something with his music, and the same with Jimi Hendrix, that it was just an immediate connection. I didn't have to work to get that connection. I can work afterwards and think about the intellectual rationalization of whatever the fuck is happening. But it's normally after the event. First of all, something like Kreutzer Sonata of Beethoven, or the concerto, or some of the romances, or listening to the symphonies and thinking maybe I could conduct that, but I hate conductors, so I'm not going to do it. But like, you know, this amazing language of Beethoven, the humanity and the structure, this new long elongated structure, it's just something which hits me there in the heart, and I can just relate to it. And so that's with, I feel like I can have dialogue with someone like Beethoven or Jimi Hendrix. It's not with many dead people that I get that. You know, my granddad, maybe it's a linear thing because of this Irish, you know, and there's something in the blood about it. And he was also a musician, but there's not many examples on record of him. There's like, I don't know, maybe 10 recordings of him. But I can feel something there as well, but he wasn't a composer, so I don't have any way in there in the same way. But like with Beethoven, I've got that indelible identity, kind of a sympathetic realization of it. Same with Jimi Hendrix, you know, like, and it's not something I'm asking for to happen, it's just happened. So I can really feel like I am conversing with these guys when I'm looking into how to best realize their music emotionally, and then how to represent it. Not so much how to represent it, but how to relate to it. Then I can almost get like in a kind of rational discussion about how best to do it.
That's interesting, because in your conversation with Hendrix, he even analyzes his own pieces. You talk about specific songs, and he says, "Ah, yeah, that's like a cosmic symphony, and that's the chorus there." I found it great. What was it about Hendrix that fascinated you?
I mean, his persona was fantastic, and his guitar playing was obviously unheard of before he played like that. But it actually is not that, it's his compositions which are the most, the biggest conduit between his music and me, is how his compositions were. You know, so the openness of the music, the complete refusal to be conforming to a category. You know, I mean, okay, you might hear a little bit of Isley Brothers in da-da, ba-dam, 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 da-da, crosstown traffic. You know, you might hear a bit of fucking Isley Brothers in there, but he's not fucking doing Motown or soul music, you know? And like with Little Wing, one might hear fucking a little bit of Celtic or fucking folky shit in that melody, but he's not doing folky shit, you know? But he's got all of these aspects of music in him, in some kind of cosmic soul that he's got. It embraces everything, and his introduction for many people to different types of music without even having to have it specified what it is. Third Stone from the Sun, you know, fusion, jazz rock, you know, it's kind of like you could label those things, but it's always bigger than the label with him. And like, so that really, for an explorative fucker like myself, you know, I really love that. This freedom to identify some trancey aspect. And it's coming from Jimi, who was one of the first ones to do trance-ish type of stuff, or some beautiful harmonic sequence, which other people of the time probably did not come up with, although you did have great bands like the Byrds and like other people coming up with beautiful harmonic stuff. But somehow Hendrix was always connected with the earth and with the cosmos, you know. He had this thing which was such openness, but I've never really heard the same breadth of spiritual reality in anyone else's music.
Is it right to say that just regarding attitude, you always felt a bit close, or you have many good friends of yours are rock musicians, many people you collaborated with, and sometimes it seems to me reading your work that you felt a bit closer to rock musicians most of the time due to their unwilling, like the uncompromisable burst of energy and their willingness to create something like Robert Plant or you name it, that you felt closer to them than to classical musicians, or is it?
I would say so, because I would say that, like, someone mentioned it to me yesterday in a very succinct way, that, you know, classical players are cover artists, aren't they? You know, like, and so it's kind of a glorified cover artistry, you know, like the next fucker to sing Fever, you know, and like, you know, so, you know, it's like, how many fucking singers do you get in whatever club you go to, and they get up and sing fucking Fever, you know? But like, in the classical music, how many versions of Mendelssohn, Beethoven, Brahms, whatever composer we want to talk about, you know, like, it's all cover artists. And what I get really excited by is what Beethoven was. And what Beethoven was a great composing performer who was performing his own stuff, right? And the only next really great era of that is in rock and roll, where these great artists were composing big form stuff and they were performing it with personality and unique kind of charisma. So, of course, yes, I'm drawn more to the rock and roll fuckers, if one wants to call it that, because people like The Who are creating amazing structures, and it's their own stuff, and they're performing it better than anybody else could. You know, bringing a life and a vitality and a new vision, or, you know, certainly in the 70s, they did that. And even when they perform their stuff now, or when the Stones did that retrospective in London, like about 3 or 4 years ago, and like, it was just amazing what they do. They might look like, you know, slightly bored old men when they're not doing their stuff, but like when they get on stage and that electricity happens, you can't beat that. And with confines of the classical, I obviously really admire these amazing players on the violin and the piano. And, you know, there's not many, though, who come through with this fresh energy, which you can find in so many of these great creators from the 70s and 80s.
In the book, when you talked about your time busking in New York City, and even a thought, if this doesn't work out, I can go to busking, like having that attitude towards it. What do you remember about your time? How was it for you to be a busker in New York at the time?
Well, it was very good because they didn't have licensing.
Yeah.
Now every busker has got to have a license, even to perform in that like little like what do you call it, promenade in the middle of Central Park with all them benches one after the other, right? And like now you've got to get a license to do it. It's kind of ridiculous, man. Like, that is a discrimination against musicians. Like, half of the people walking down that promenade on the weekends, you know, it's only on Saturday and Sunday, and people walking down there, they're going to hear the musicians. Otherwise, they'd go to some other part of Central Park, you know. I remember going in Central Park just to divert for a minute, and like, I was running around the reservoir because it's a great place. You can go up to the fucking north and see like the skyline of New York, and like then you're coming back round and down into the more affluent parts of Manhattan, and like I saw Yoko, man, and like, but it was a cold day, and like so I ran up to her and said, Yoko, I've just been working with Paul. And she went, ugh! And she ran away because I got my balaclava on because it was really fucking cold. And she thought I was mugging her, man. You know, so that was the end of that story. Never met her again. But what was your question, mate? Like,
what your memories? I mean, you made a pretty good income. You said you made about what, $300 an hour, which today would have been like 3,000.
Yeah, it paid the rent, and just from one day, it would pay the rent for all of us, like who we were sharing, 3 of us in a flat, and like I could do it with one other geezer, cello friend of mine, and yeah, we'd come with 200-300 from 2 hours. 2 hours of playing. And so that was brilliant, to pay a month's rent and have enough for dinner, but we could go to a pretty nice restaurant and sit down and pay in quarters, you know, and there'd be a fucking mountain of fucking quarters, you know, on the table. And that was quite amusing, because we could say to the waiter or the waitress, it's okay, your tip's in there as well, you know. Like, but it was a good way to make a living, because like people who wanted to hear it could stop, and people who didn't want to hear it could walk on. So it wasn't kind of like this kind of you're stuck in the fucking concert hall and you can't get out, you know. Like people could just relate to the music if it was worth relating to it. It taught me quite a lot about relating to an audience and what might they like to listen to, what would turn people on a little bit, and what would make them as bored as a motherfucking wooden floor, you know.
Brilliant. Well then, thank you so much for taking the time. It was a big pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, man. And I'd like to shake hands with you, but it's very difficult.
Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah. Next time. Have a great evening then.
You too, man. Have a great one, man.